Nobody better understands the psychopathic nature of the modern left than General Michael Flynn. Just days into his tenure as National Security Advisor, Flynn was entrapped by a hostile FBI that wanted him gone for political reasons. Shortly after, the Mueller investigation targeted him, and he spent the next 3 years battling a relentless effort to send him to prison. Even after DOJ prosecutors attempted to drop Flynn's case, Judge Emmett Sullivan frantically tried to keep the case alive, even appointing a, quote, friend of the court to argue that Flynn was guilty of perjury for trying to withdraw his guilty plea. In the end, a pardon from President Trump finally ended a case that should never have existed in the first place. But through it all, General Flynn was never defeated, and now he's back and stronger than ever before. He has generously agreed to sit down with Revolver for a few questions. General Flynn, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Darren. I'll clarify one thing on your statement, which I appreciate. It wasn't an out-of-control FBI. It was a deeply corrupt government and a set of government institutions and leaders at the highest levels, to include inside of the White House at the time, in the 2015 and 2016, and then even through 2017, even into the period of President Trump's early days in office. And it carried through in organizations like various elements of the intelligence community, FBI being among them, and certainly in a Department of Justice that incentivizes themselves by seeking to convict versus finding and discovering the truth. And that's really an important component of my case, which was an international case, actually. And it was just the beginning of what we're continuing to see happening across our federal government and the institutions today, as well as in many cases around the country that we're experiencing. So thanks for having me. Thanks to Revolver for what Revolver does. And, and everything that you guys are trying to establish in terms of getting the truth out.
We're huge fans of yours, and in my opinion, what happened to you was one of the most shameful episodes in our country's history. And so if you could explain why are they so viciously after you? What is it about you that made the entire national security apparatus apoplectic and terrified in those early days in the Trump transition and then into the early days of his presidency?
Yeah, and that includes President Obama, so who during the transition conversation or discussion like we're having right now with the incoming president, as he was the outgoing president, in the one conversation that he had about transitioning the entire United States government from one president to another, from one duly elected president to another duly elected president, the topic that President Obama decided to bring up were two, one of which was Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and the other was Mike Flynn. So
amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's just
so. What is it? Why are they so scared?
Well,
of you?
because the knowledge that I have, having grown up and having served at the highest levels of our government in uniform, both as the senior military intelligence officer for the Department of Defense, as head of one of the largest intelligence agencies, not only in the United States but in the world, as having worked at the Director of National Intelligence level office. And here I was, a guy who really understood where things operate within the government, how things operate within the government, deep knowledge of many of the programs that we do have and still are in play today that are totally unnecessary and incredibly costly for our nation, both in terms of our moral authority as a country and also in our fiscal responsibility to the American people. So, and they knew that I had that level of knowledge, and I was going to be, literally sitting at the right hand of the President of the United States as the National Security Advisor. So, access to everything, and knowledge of many of the things that I knew that were already going on. And one of the things that I would have discovered almost immediately, but certainly as we got going, was I would have discovered the clear violation of law where candidate Trump was being spied upon, as well as his team, which meant me and others,
Right.
that we were being spied upon without warrant, without cause, solely for political reasons to defeat, at that time, candidate Trump. And of course, everybody knows what happened. He won overwhelmingly in 2016. And then for the next 4 years, the deep state, quote unquote deep state, with all of the strength and power and authorities of particularly the executive branch, but also elements of the technology world and the media world, then proceeded to bash Donald J. Trump, about the head and shoulders, and tried to do everything that they could to defeat him, and that not to get him out of office, to remove him from office as a duly elected president. They had already gotten me out of the way, and they did it pretty smartly. I mean, I think that they, it was a very well orchestrated, well planned maneuver. I will tell you, I will sit here today, and maybe it's a little bit breaking, but I think I've said this in some public forums, that there are Republicans that were involved in this effort against me, because many Republicans who are in the establishment in Washington, D.C., also did not want me to have that kind of role with President Trump, because I had a great relationship with him, still do, and he is a non-establishment guy. I am a non-establishment guy, and I think that he had some ideas about reform that we had spoken about, and we would have probably initiated, and so they had to get rid of me just as fast as they could.
That's very interesting what you said about these Republicans. Will the public, the American public, have an opportunity to know more about who exactly these Republicans were and what they did?
Yeah, I think that they will. I mean, as time goes on, you can, and I think for those people and many millions around the country, I run into people all the time, Darren, who come up to me and tell me, we were praying for you, we were praying for your family, we're so sorry what our country did to me during these years of persecution. And I always tell people that prayer is the most powerful weapon known to man. And so, to answer your question specifically, will we know? Yeah, we will know one day, because the truth does always come out, always does, no matter what. No matter what the issue is, the truth will always rise to the top. And when it does, now we have to decide on accountability. And in some cases, people will be accountable, at the gates of heaven or the gates of hell. And that may be the only time they're accountable, because under certain aspects of our system right now, particularly the Department of Justice, there's a lack of accountability. And so I think accountability will come as the truth begins to come out, and more of it will come out. As even more information came out just recently,
right,
about my case,
right,
just recently in this past week. So, and here we are sitting. This is after the 4th of July weekend, and whatever today is,
right,
9th of July, 2021, and there's still evidence, still truth coming out about my case, which is mind-blowing.
It's remarkable. And if you do choose to expose who specifically these Republicans are, let us know, because there's nothing we enjoy more at Revolver than exposing corrupt and slimy establishment Republicans, especially in this case. I want to pick up on this really shameful persecution of you and kind of situate it in a broader context. I think this in many ways was the opening salvo of a very troubling transformation within our country, and that is the political weaponization of our national security apparatus, culminating now in essentially a domestic war on terror directed against the 70+ million people who voted for Trump or who have any opposition to our corrupt ruling establishment. And my position is that basically we're not going to have a real country unless we bring this national security apparatus to heel. So given your vast experience and knowledge of this apparatus, I'd really love to know, what do you think, if there's one thing that politicians can coalesce around as an agenda item to say, this is the first major step to address this bigger problem, what would you say that would be?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think that there's a range of actions that must occur. I think the principal one, and this is really for what I would call mainstream Democrats, Okay, mainstream Democrats, not the hard left, not the Marxists, not the socialists, not the communists that are in our government, that are in our federal government. And so to take one step back, there is an attempt and an effort intentionally to federalize everything, to create a socialist state at the federal level that basically controls our lives. And our Constitution was really designed from the ground up. It was really designed to protect individual liberties. And then as you progress your way up to the top, up to the federal government, through parishes or counties, and then to state level, the founders actually created our entire country based on individual liberties. So there's this intentional theft of individual liberties by elements within the federal government and the institutions of our federal government that are cooperating to a degree with some of these elements on the left, because they've I'll use a military term, they've infiltrated many of the institutions of government. So and this is not conspiracy theory. This is actual. There's a lot of facts based on what I just stated, and there's a lot of books written about it. There's been a lot of great journalists who have actually done good investigative journalism and discovered some of these truths. You can look at my case as a dark but shining example of the deep levels of corruption to target an individual, to target a president, because we know from an agent of the FBI, as an example, the entire effort, and this didn't come out until really just recently, and recently being right prior to this past presidential election, so October of 2020, where the entire effort was to get Flynn to get Trump.
Right.
So when you think about that alone, and you hear that statement, you say, how could this happen in the United States of America? And it happens because the American people have taken for granted our freedoms for far too long. And we've allowed the institutions that are in many cases at the local level, school boards, for example, county seats, county boards, and then all the way up to state capitals and the federal government. We've allowed our government to kind of we just take it for granted, and that they're going to do it. They, the politically elected, or the government appointed people that are in these positions, and we've just entrusted them for many, many decades. And what has happened is the running rampant with our freedoms and our dollars, our taxes, tax dollars, running rampant. I mean rampant, with enormous, extraordinary debt that this country has, and some of the other things that we have allowed with this open border policy, the horrors that we find in our school systems, both at the elementary and secondary level, to now include the graduate and undergraduate level schools around the country that are also infiltrated and also impacted by just really policies and procedures and in some cases orders, executive orders for certain that president's state, or laws in other cases that come out that dictate things. And we have the government teaching our children instead of parents teaching our children. Right. The breakdown of the family. I mean, I could go on and on with things that we have just allowed to happen. And so I get off my soapbox on this one, Darren, but my big message is that local action has a national impact, and all the American people have to quit complaining about those people, the politicians, those people at the county, those people at the state, those people in Washington. They're all a bunch of bums. They're all corrupt. We put them there. We put them there. And we've taken for granted far too long our own freedoms. And we've not understood why this country was created. And so what we have to do is we have to renew our knowledge in what it is why we have what we have. And that includes many, many Democrats, because as I have stated and written about, I was a lifelong Democrat. In fact, even when I was running with Trump in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, he knew I was a Democrat. Right. And I was a Democrat because I grew up in an era where we were pro-life, pro-family, pro-small business Democrats, right? Right. And then all of a sudden the Democratic Party started to shift, And in the military, I was very apolitical. Didn't really care. I was an officer who looked at legal, moral, ethical laws and orders, and would follow those and follow the foreign policy directives of our national leadership. And I never really thought about politics all that much. You'd have a president come in, a president go out. He's the commander in chief. You follow the orders that you're given, as long as they're legal, moral, and ethical, and you can live with yourself. I think today that's more challenging for those that are serving in the military, but
Yes.
That's maybe another conversation.
Yes. No, that's very interesting, the local federal distinction
Yeah.
and the dissipation of the basic federalist structure of power has been something that has unfortunately been lessening for several decades.
Decades.
But at the federal level, I wanted to get more granular on this concept of deep state that people talk about, this concept. And I wonder what you think about any possibility of, say, leveraging intra-factional disputes within the deep state. And what I mean by that is one of the biggest stories we ran on Revolver.news was about color revolution, employed domestically. And the media freaked out over this. And a lot of the national security operatives who are part of this color revolution network freaked out. And I think part of the reaction came from deep state being a kind of broad, vague, and amorphous term. The color revolution story really implicated a specific sub-faction of the deep state, this Atlanticist faction that's obsessed with Russia and so forth. And there are other factions as well. And I was wondering if you could give a little lay of the land as to institutionally, are there different cultures within, say, CIA versus NSA? And are there different factions that are they different enough that you can leverage those differences to actually make any positive change within the broader bureaucratic apparatus, or is it just so corrupt that it's a non-starter?
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's so deeply corrupt that there has to be fundamental and in some cases radical change of certain institutions at the federal level. There has to be, because we cannot withstand or continue this beautiful experiment in democracy called the constitutional republic with the culture that has been created. And so when people throw out the phrase deep state, what is the deep state? The deep state is an amorphous grouping of components. It's elements of the intelligence community. It's elements of the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C., particularly Washington, D.C. It's elements of the media. It's clearly the tech, the new tech world that has emerged over the last couple of decades. And these are not conspiracy theories. I mean, censorship is not a conspiracy theory, right? I mean, they censored the President of the United States. I mean, I think Trump just put out his lawsuit.
The sitting president of the United States
is censored.
Deplatformed from the United States communications infrastructure.
Right. So, and other aspects that are known truths that are not conspiracy theories. So, the color revolution that you talk about, like Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has nothing to do with Black lives. It has everything to do with an ideological shift towards Marxism, socialism, and communism in this country by a very well-funded, well-organized group of people, and they are adamant, and they have arms not being arms like this arm or a weapon arms like a rifle or something, but they have arms of tentacles that are inside of our federal government, inside of the media, inside of the tech world, and clearly inside of various communities around the country. And that's how deep those tentacles run. And they actually have, in the case of an Antifa, as an example, an Antifa is actually an action arm of not just Black Lives Matter, but also this infusion into our society, into our American culture of Marxism. And and here we are. I mean, here I am as a guy who served this country for decades, and I've been around the country, and we're now talking about communism, this country going towards socialism and communism in the United States. The other thing that's a fact, not conspiracy theory, is that nation states don't last forever, right? You never met anybody from Byzantine. Byzantine's one of the oldest empires, right? Because it's gone. So there are nation states in the history of the world that have risen, operated at a fairly high level, and then they collapsed for a variety of reasons. And so when we look at the indicators of the potential waning of the United States of America, many of those indicators are there. And one of which is the breakdown of faith, both faith in a higher being, meaning God, particularly in our country, because our country was built on Judeo-Christian principles and values, and we've sort of lost that faith. That's number one. And also, the second thing is really faith in our institutions of government. The American people don't have any faith. They don't have any faith in the FBI. They don't have any faith in the CIA. They don't have any faith in the Department of Justice. They're losing faith in the Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. That's not a good thing. It's not healthy. So when Americans begin to lose faith in the institutions of government, and it's not just that they're losing, in many cases they've lost faith. So they begin to turn towards, and hopefully in peaceful ways, they begin to turn towards their local governments more. And that's actually a healthy thing that we're still allowed to do, because that's the way the Constitution was designed. Our Constitution wasn't designed from the top down. It was actually designed from the bottom up. The founders decided to give individual liberties first and the most attention, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and then they worked their way up as to how much power they were going to give the next level and the next level.
Right.
And they actually gave the federal government very little power.
Right.
But the federal government today has extraordinary power, and that's not the way our country is going to last forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly a monumental task to change that arrangement. As we both noted, this has been something that's happening really since the Civil War.
Yeah.
There's a major fundamental transformation of the kind of federalist structure of power. I'll turn to geopolitics, a geopolitical question here. The press and Congress exploited the Russia hoax to force President Trump to take a tougher line on Russia. And to some degree, I think that was effective, though it's ambiguous. I'm curious, what kind of foreign policy was being planned during the campaign and transition, and what opportunities, if any, did America lose thanks to the distraction of the Russia hoax?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and we probably ought to have another whole longer conversation about that, but quickly, and as succinct as I can be. So clearly the situation in the Middle East and Central Asia, so principally Iraq, Syria, and then of course Afghanistan, that being Central Asia, and then the Middle East being Iraq, Syria, and the various challenges to a degree what we were seeing happening in North Africa, Egypt, the whole Iranian problem, which the previous administration had just caused extraordinary problems with joining, pretending like Iran was ever going to be, a friend of the United States, right. At least not under the current regime that's over in Iran. So that was one. The second was how to deal with Russia, how to deal with a nation state that is one of the most powerful countries on the planet, who, under the Obama regime, had done incursions into Crimea and Eastern Europe, let's just say, Ukraine and such, but also was operating in Syria. So the Russians were operating in Syria. It was the first time ever in the history of Russia where they had essentially a Black Sea fleet that was now operating in the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay, so a lot of people, when they look at the geostrategic issues of Russia, they just look at Russia bad, like Putin is a criminal or whatever they say. They don't understand the actual landscape of how Russia was physically operating in this world that, under the weakness of the Obama administration, allowed. And I saw that. I saw that in uniform, and I learned a lot from that. And then the most important, and I left it for last, was really China. China is a power on the rise in a big, big way. China has been operating inside of the United States government and the United States landscape for many, many decades, and in very smart, sophisticated ways, never mind inside of our economic system, which Trump truly understood. I mean, Trump instinctively and understood exactly what needed to be done from a economic standpoint, and I thought that the various trade agreements and things that he got involved in, so Trump made big strides to push back on the economic component of Chinese warfare. Right? Never mind the informational component, because that existed as well.
Right.
So he did that, and he also gave prominence to our military, to the growth and the budgeting and the interest by the President of the United States in the military and what the military, what they were supposed to be able to do to accomplish. So he gave them the notoriety that they needed, the love that they needed, but he also pushed back wherever he could on China. So we had those conversations a lot, quite a bit. I mean, you throw in countries like North Korea and what was happening in North Korea, and I think Trump actually handled North Korea very adeptly, and countries like Venezuela, the drug problem in Mexico. So we had conversations about all these various things, and also to include NATO, the NATO structure, the NATO, not only the NATO military capabilities from a military perspective, but what was the NATO economic position? You know, because we fund a lot of NATO, we were funding NATO forever, right?
Right.
And how NATO can or should operate. So those are a couple of the topics of conversation that we spent quite a bit on. But the principal one was really China.
Interesting. And just as a follow-up in China in relation to Russia, is that, at least to me, and I'm not a national security professional, but as an observer, it seems what's lost in a lot of conversations about geopolitics is the necessity of some degree of prioritization. And so if you look at the position, I would say not to pick on him, but maybe actually to pick on him, someone like John Bolton, who seems to be completely promiscuous and indiscriminate in the sense of, if he got his way, we would be at war with China, Russia, Iran, and probably 10 other countries that we haven't heard of yet, versus this notion that maybe you need to prioritize threats. And in relation to Russia and China, I wonder if this focus on expanding NATO, pushing NATO, maybe focusing on the geopolitical issues in Crimea, which is way more important to them strategically than it is to us, whether that expends political capital that might otherwise have been used to shore up an alliance against China. Is that possibly a missed opportunity?
Huge missed opportunities, and the beating of Trump about Russia hurt his ability to be able to negotiate and just to have a conversation with a nuclear power that's probably equal or stronger than we are in terms of that capability, who has certainly a responsibility to act in a responsible way on the global stage, and for the most part, if you can look past some of the criminalization of some of the things that do happen, we cannot continue to operate the way many of these neocons, meaning people that want to just go to war with everybody. We can't keep operating like that. We have to use other elements of power, and we've got to use them in a very smart way. I mean, if the United States of America is the global, is producing energy more than any other country in the planet, like we used to, rely on countries like Saudi Arabia or OPEC. We used to rely on consortiums like OPEC for our oil, right? So if the United States becomes a energy producer and provider to the rest of the world, that's a pretty significant thing. That is an element of power that we now have leverage over some of these other countries. So we don't have to kowtow like we did for decades, actually, under multiple administrations, to include the Bush administration.
Right.
So I'm not going to give them a pass.
Right.
So we've had, we really didn't have anybody. We really didn't have a leader that came into office, in this case, a non-establishment figure like a Donald J. Trump, who said, I'm going to leverage a different aspect of a set of powers and capabilities that the United States has that others have not really taken advantage of. And I'm going to do it through economic, in a way, through our economic strengths and returning certain manufacturing to the United States, returning certain capabilities back to the United States, making us a world energy provider and producer than a consumer, right? So there's so many missed opportunities, and we are now in a place where I think that the nation, if people don't begin to to awaken, to use a word that gets used too often probably, but if people at the local level do not start to stand up and take responsibility for their actions and their local communities, this country will go the way, as I facetiously talked about, Byzantine. And when we have people, particularly on the sort of the neo-con left, and there's many of them in Washington D.C., particularly in some of these think tanks, and I could name a couple of people by name. These people that want to extend particularly our military power overseas and continue to waste resources on things that we really don't need, right? We don't need it. What we need to do is allow some of these nations to go ahead and let those around them take care of themselves, like what Trump tried to do at the tail end of his administration, this past administration, where he tried to broker this Middle East peace. It wasn't so much Middle East peace as it was an arrangement of how they need to take responsibility for their neighborhood. It wasn't about peace, because peace is an aberration, right? War is the norm. I mean, we're 20 years into post 9/11. We're still 20 years at war. You call it what you want, but it's 20 years of this century is 2 decades long, and we've been at war for 20 years. So don't tell me that, peace is the norm. It's not. It's not. It is for 99.9% of the people in the country, because less than 1% of the people in this country actually serve in our armed forces. So there's a lot in that package of that answer that I just gave you, but what we really need is we need to have a very focused effort and a very focused discussion, but we need to have leaders stepping forward. I'm sick of the politicians. I'm tired of them. The American public are tired of the political doublespeak, where they come and they pat you on the head, they put their hand out, ask for a little bit of money, they tell you anything that you think that you want to hear, and then they walk away and they do just the opposite. And they start putting knives, not in the backs of the American people, they start putting knives right through the forehead of the American citizenry. And they've done that for years. And yet we continue to pile on our votes, and we just go in there blindly into the voting booth, both Democrat and Republican, and we just hit the lever and we vote these people into office. I mean, the communities of color, if we want to talk about color, this country is about 30% Hispanic. It's about 12 to 13% African American nationally. So, and then you have other communities of color that are everything from Portuguese to Eastern Europe to different ethnicities and immigrant communities that make up the fabric of the United States of America. What we really need to do is the people of this country need to take back this country. We need to take it back peacefully, but we need to take it back at the local level. And anybody who's living in poverty in a city that's run by a quote unquote Democratic mayor, get rid of the bum. Get rid of him. You look at the conservative makeup of some large or mid-sized cities in this country that are thriving, and then you look at cities like LA or New York or Atlanta or you name the Chicago, and I think the number, I'll probably get my number wrong, and I'm gonna get off my soapbox here in a minute, but I think last weekend it was like 270 shots fired last weekend. Yep. 270, and some number of people died tragically. A young adult who was a student, I think, at the University of
we
Chicago.
just actually Revolver News just ran a piece
Yeah.
on him. Yeah.
So I mean, it's sad. I mean, because it's tragic. These are, you know, we say Democrat-run cities. These are not Democrat-run cities. These are people who lean so far left that they're now. I have a tough time using the word Democrat because I was one, and I know what a Democrat used to be. I know what a Democrat used to be. A Democrat is no longer a Democrat like I grew up. They are now a leftist socialist, and the use of the words progressive or liberal are just stolen words from the English language to make young people, particularly young people and communities of color, think that, well, that's pretty cool. Like young people, that's cool to be a liberal. It's cool to be a progressive. It's not about that. It's about moving our country towards the ideology of Marxism, socialism, and communism. And that's the reality. That's what we face.
Absolutely. And I gather from that really it seems that the chief national security threat that we face is the dysfunction, corruption, and perhaps even illegitimacy in the broader sense of our ruling class. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the number one national security threat. It's hard to see unless we solve this leadership problem in its broader sense how we can navigate a 21st century competition with China, really do anything, which is why my sense is that, yes, we have threats overseas, but it seems like the number one enemy and threat to American people's livelihood is not even any foreign country, not even China, right, but the people who control America. And that leads me to the final question, which pertains to the institutions that are most venerated and most needed for protecting America's security, mm-hmm, which is the military. And so we've written a lot about the decline of the U.S. military, and we're about essentially to lose Afghanistan to the Taliban after 20 years, as you pointed out, of squandered effort to a large degree. Last December, you retweeted a proposal to have the military oversee a national revote to resolve the dispute over the 2020 election results. Mm-hmm. But in the past 6 months, we've seen the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff brag about studying, quote, white rage. The Pentagon is handing out free transgender surgeries and encouraging officers to pick fights with Tucker Carlson on Twitter. And of course, Bishop Garrison, I mentioned, this ideological veteran-in-chief for this new mm-hmm, quote-unquote extremism vetting operation. He is now the new norm within the Pentagon under Biden. And so organizing a purge of anyone with MAGA sympathies. So have we reached a point, and again, this is a tough pill to take or even a tough question to bring up, but have we reached a point where conservative nationalists simply can't trust the military to effectively protect their well-being? And what must be done to restore the military we once had? What would you say to a patriotic young person who wants to serve his country? He wants to join the best fighting force in the world, mm-hmm, protecting the best country in the world, but he sees all this that's happening and he's just, I don't know if I should do it. How do we fix the military?
Yeah. So first of all, the military is purposely designed to fight and win the nation's wars. Okay? Why we have a military, why we have an active duty military, why we have a reserve force. You know, the National Guard has different purposes, but it is to fight and win, not fight and participate in wars like we've been doing for 20 years. We're sort of an A+ at participating. We're an A+ at winning tactical engagements at the lower level, but we're a failure at winning, and that's a really strong statement for me to say. But I've said it in uniform. I wrote about it. We've forgotten how to win wars. We've been doing this. We've sort of forgotten that not just what's happened in the Middle East and Afghanistan for the last 20 years, but you can go back to Vietnam, you can go back to Korea. So the Korean War. So what's happening in our institutions of government is this sort of continuation of an effort to reculturalize the federal government, to change the culture of the federal government. And there's institutions that are easier to do that in. Intelligence communities, one. It's easier to do that in the intelligence community. It's easier to do that in the State Department. It's easier to do that in various departments and activities and agencies within the government, the whole of government, than it is to do in the military. So, the question is there an effort by those quote unquote leaders in our federal government right now that are in charge, is there an effort to shift the culture of the military from one thing that it was to something that it shouldn't be? And I think that there seems to be some indicators of that. Definitely seems to be some indicators of that. Our men and women serve in the military for one purpose, and that's it. And I said it earlier. Now, so what do I say to the parents out there, or the moms and dads who have a kid that shows up at home and goes, I want to join the Army, or I want to join the Marine Corps? So I think that the most honorable thing that a person can do in terms of serving their country is to serve in the military. I believe that, to serve in the institution of the military. And they do it for a variety of reasons. Some cases it wants to get out of the hometown that they're in, wants to get out of the environment that they're in. They want to get a skill. They look at the GI Bill and they say, geez, if I go to, I've served 4 years, I'll be able to pay for 4 years of college. So they do it for a variety of reasons. But the one thing that I would tell any listener, any reader, is this, and I've said this publicly many times. When a young man or a young woman goes to sign up with a recruiter in hometown USA recruiting stations to be a cook, a truck driver, an infantryman, an aviator, whatever the skill is, a submarine driver, whatever, in the Navy, a pilot in the Air Force, when they go to sign up, it's not to just get a skill or to get an ability to pay for your college, but they don't totally understand what I'm about to tell you when they're young and they're signing that dotted line. But when a young man or woman signs on that dotted line, and this is the beauty, the honorable thing that we don't think about it as an American citizenry with an all-volunteer force, because they're volunteering to join our military, and that's what I love about these young men and young women who so willingly do this. When they sign on that dotted line, they're actually signing to give their life for the United States of America. And many of them don't realize that because they're too young and they're thinking about other things. And you don't think about life like that at that moment. You're just signing because I want to get out of my neighborhood. I want to go get this job. I want to do whatever. But you're actually signing a contract. And the contract is to give your life for this country. And so I want young men and I want young women to continue to serve, to potentially give and pay the ultimate sacrifice so future generations like my grandchildren can continue to thrive in a free and fair and honest country that where people are able to thrive with all the freedoms that we have, and that we have fought and sacrificed for 246 years, I think, this year. So that's really where our military is at, and I think moms and dads, and hopefully anybody that listens to this, understands that, because we need young men and women to continue to join our military, because we are going to be in wars again. We're going to be in big wars again, as we are continuing to be in the wars that we're in. So I'll just finish, Darren, by saying that I think that as the nation goes forward, the most important institution that we must maintain, that the federal government must maintain in as strong a posture as possible, is our military. And so when the military is at risk because of this cultural adaptation that this particular administration wants to impose on it, we have to be very, very careful. And the people in the military have to be very careful. The leaders in uniform have to be very honest with themselves and not be ambitious to get to the next rank or to say, because one thing that I do know, because I felt it, you feel like, well, when you get a lousy order, it's not unethical, it's not illegal, it's not immoral, but it's just a lousy order. If it's something that you don't believe in, and you know you don't believe in it, you can't sit there and go, well, I think if I stay in, I'll be able to maneuver it, and I'll be able to do better than the next guy. Actually, I think what some leaders need to start thinking about is, should they resign? And I think that there are those in the military that don't believe in this stuff about critical race theory or white rage or this culturalization that incentivizes something that the United States of America is not. And I mean, talk about a melting pot. The United States military is such a melting pot. I never cared whether somebody was purple with pink polka dots, because like my father taught me, there's no atheist in a foxhole. And you really truly do look at what's in a man or woman's heart when you are going into combat. And are they capable? Are they trained? Like I said, I don't care what color they are. I actually don't care what they in other aspects of their life. What I care about is at that moment, are they willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with somebody, and are they trained enough, and do they have that? Because everybody has fear, everybody senses fear, but are they willing to stand up for what is right and good, and not fall because somebody says you're not good enough, right? Because you're not the right color or you're not the right whatever. I mean, we cannot have that kind of culturalization in our military. And there's a lot of people that are upset about that in this country today. We have about 20, maybe 23 million veterans. And that's not what, we serve to have a military that is ready to fight and win our nation's war. So thanks for having me, Darren, and this conversation. I hope that your readers and listeners get something out of it.
Thank you so much,
God
General,
bless.
for your service, for your courage, and for your time.
God bless.
Darren Beattie joins us tonight to explain. Darren, thanks so much for coming on. So many of Drudge's longtime readers have fled to Revolver News. According to a new study by Revolver.news, which effectively is the new Drudge Report, since the actual Drudge Report went completely insane and is unreadable. According to a study they commissioned, the coronavirus lockdowns have been 10 times more deadly than the coronavirus itself in this country. According to an exhaustive and fascinating new analysis on Revolver News, there's no evidence that Brian Sicknick was hit with a fire extinguisher at any point during the day. None.
The indispensable replacement for the Drudge Report, Revolver.news. Take care.
Led by a radical leftist named Bishop Garrison. And nobody would have known about it if it wasn't for my next guest. Darren Beattie and his team at Revolver News have been digging into this for weeks.
Hey, Darren, big fan of yours too. Revolver is just killing it.
And he's our guest, Darren Beattie, now over at Revolver.news, breaking another bombshell story. So what's the evidence, Darren? You've already blown up the New York Times. You got them to change their story about 9 times now. What is the evidence that supports this?
Thanks for having me. Thanks to Revolver for what Revolver does.